Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Friday morning, talking tonight's 8-game slate around the association. Before we dig into the games, your daily quick reminder, please make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. That way you will get notified whenever I post a brand new video. Also, if you happen to stumble across this video and you're not already following me on Twitter, make sure you do that. My Twitter handle at BrentHyden1 is down in the description below. And while you're over there on the Twitter machine, hitting that follow button, make sure you send me a DM and you can find out how you can get access to my projections and content, all for a very affordable price. Also, if you like the content I'm producing, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button. It goes a long way to helping me get a bigger audience. But without further ado, let's take a look at the games. First game we're going to talk about here is Toronto at Boston. Interesting game to talk about here. Boston 1.5-point favorites, 214 over under. Raptors coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Pistons and their former coach, looking to bounce back from that. Looking at the Toronto side of things, Boston's defense is really, really good. They are only giving up 103.8 points per game. There's not a whole lot of weaknesses in this offense except for their inability to defend in the mid-range. They are allowing opponents to shoot pretty well in the mid-range. That being said, they've really struggled against high usage scorers, and it's been something that's we've been able to pick up on. Some guys have had really good games against them, some of your high usage scorers, and that has me interested in Kawhi Leonard here, who comes in sporting a near 30% usage rate on the season. Put up over 50 fantasy points against the Celtics last time these teams faced off. He's a little bit pricey, $9K over on DraftKings, and over here on FanDuel he is $9,700. But I feel pretty confident in Kawhi Leonard in cash games in this spot. I think it's an excellent spot for him. I'm going to have some exposure to him. He's fine in tournaments too. It's going to be a little bit hard for him to get on top of that salary in tournaments, but I'm perfectly fine rolling him out if you want to pay up for Leonard tonight. The rest of these guys, Boston's given up about 47.4 rebounds per game to opponents. We've been able to attack them with guys in the paint from time to time this season. That has me interested in Serge Ibaka, who is going to should play in this game. He wasn't on yesterday's injury report. Comes in at 6,200 on DraftKings, comes in at 6,400 on FanDuel. Again, more of a cash game play in this spot. Going to be kind of tough for him to get on top of that salary in tournaments, but I'm fine with him in all formats if you so choose. Pascal Siakam, definitely someone to consider in cash games. Has not really been hurt by Kawhi Leonard being back, and he's just been putting up really good numbers. So I'm fine with Siakam in cash games. One guy to keep an eye on is going to be OG Anunoby. Just kind of a tournament punt option here. 3,700 over on DraftKings. Has been playing really well, and he's a guy that I've been targeting recently. I mean, over 20 fantasy points in 5 straight games. I mean, he's just been playing solid numbers, putting up double-digit field goal attempts off the bench. Could get a couple extra minutes with CJ Miles being out, Norman Powell being out, and if Danny Green misses this game, someone that could pick up a couple extra minutes. But that pretty much does it from the Toronto side of things. If you want to sprinkle in some Kyle Lowry at a depressed price tag in tournaments, that's perfectly fine as well. Toronto is an excellent defense, but there's still some spots where we can attack them. That starts with Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving at 7,700 on DraftKings. Way too cheap. Should be over 8K for sure. They priced him down because of the matchup. 8,500 over on FanDuel. A little bit more of a steady price, but I still like him pretty much all formats here. Toronto does struggle to defend the pick-and-roll ball handler. They're giving up 0.97 points per possession in the pick-and-roll this season. Kyrie operating in the pick-and-roll 26% of the time. He's been playing really well since he trimmed his beard and got his haircuts. Over the last 4 games, he has a 29% usage rate averaging 25.7 points, 8 3-point attempts per game over that span, and shooting almost 42% from three, pulling down 5 rebounds and 6.3 assists as well. Going to be a core option for me in this spot just because he's underpriced. I know the matchup is not the greatest, but people are going to be off of him because of that, and I'm fine with Kyrie Irving in all formats. Jaylen Brown got it going last game. Interesting tournament option here. Still a little bit too cheap for the upside we know he has. He's had it in the past. 4,900 over on FanDuel and 4,600 over on DraftKings. Toronto really struggling in transition, 1.20 points per possession allowed in transition. Jaylen Brown, 33% of his possessions are coming in transition. So Jaylen Brown, someone that I have interest in tournaments. Tatum and Horford, perfectly fine in cash. Neither one stands out to be a fantastic option. They're just consistent guys for you. So if you're wanting to get a little bit more exposure to what should be a really good game, Tatum and Horford are fine. And then Gordon Hayward, we saw him come off his minutes limit last game, which was good to see. Gonna play right around that 30-minute mark. Should play right around that 30-minute mark. I prefer him in tournaments at his current price tag just because I think there's some better options to go with tonight. Moving on, we have Miami at Indiana. Woohoo. Not a very exciting game, at least on the surface. Indiana 4.5-point favorites, 212 over under. Indiana's been struggling a little bit. One win in the last 4 games, but they did get 4 days off to practice, so hopefully things are starting to turn around. Oladipo, averaging like 20 field goal attempts per game, shooting 45% from the floor. He's fine in all formats if you want a high usage guy, but at 9,300, I'd almost rather go with like Kawhi Leonard. And the same thing goes over on FanDuel at 9,900. He's coming off some solid performances, but I'd still rather like Kawhi Leonard. But it is kind of tough to get away from a guy playing like this many minutes, 36, 37, 38, and taking like 20 plus shots per game. So if you wanted to roll him out in cash or tournaments, it does make sense. I'm just going to be looking elsewhere. Sabonis, lots of upside in the spot, coming off a couple down games. His minutes have been a little bit lower than what they were, but still, he's the more productive and the better guy that Indiana can roll out at the center position. I have a lot of interest in him in tournaments. I think at 6,300, potential to have a really, really solid game in the spot. So Sabonis, someone that I have interest in tournaments here. Outside of him, Collison's really cheap. He's a decent tournament option. Even cash games, I think, depending on how lineup construction shakes out. 4,500 on DraftKings is really, really fair. 5K on FanDuel still pretty fair for Darren Collison, who put up really solid numbers in this matchup last time. Miami does struggle against point guards, so he's someone to definitely consider. GPP, cash, whichever one he fits your lineup if you really so choose. Outside of that, no one else really stands out as a good option from the Indiana side of this game. On the Miami side, obviously with Miles Turner being on the floor, Indiana not a very good rebounding team. That bodes really well for Hassan Whiteside, who is coming off a couple of down games. 7,900 on DraftKings, really, really cheap, coming off these 2 poor outings where he only played 22 minutes, got in some foul trouble. Blowouts were a little bit of an issue, but I mean, one of these was against Embiid, the other was against Brooklyn, but on a per minute basis, he's putting up monster numbers. Just wasn't getting the minutes. I expect that to change here. We saw him put up a monster outing, 20 and 11 the last time these teams faced off last week. I really like Hassan Whiteside, 7,900 on DraftKings. He is 8,800 on FanDuel. I'm fine with that price in all formats. The rest of these guys, Wayne Ellington's an interesting cheap option. He's 3,800 over on FanDuel. Over on DraftKings, he's really, really cheap as well. Getting some minutes. Dwayne Wade's still going to be out in this game. Derek Jones Jr. is questionable, but Wayne Ellington's still getting some run over his last few games, has played mid-20s into the 30s. Didn't play very well against this Indiana team last time out, but in tournaments, he's someone that I have some interest in. 22% of his shots come from the corners. Corner threes. Indiana is allowing opponents to shoot 47.4% on corner threes. So someone to consider in tournaments. No one that I'm just like super excited about. But outside of that, Josh Richardson, perfectly fine in cash in tournaments. Price is starting to come down a little bit, 6,500. Minutes are going to be there for him. Field goal attempts are going to be there for him. If he can notch, a couple blocks or steals, he's going to pay off that salary. Dragic is fine in cash, still just a little bit too cheap. And then over on FanDuel, Kelly Olynyk is 3,900, continues to be one of my favorite punt options night in and night out, as long as he's super cheap, just because he has upside. If he gets one of these 21, 22-minute games where he can notch you 25 fantasy points, he's great. If he has a Kelly Olynyk game where he gets you 11 or 7 fantasy points, guess what? His score gets dropped. So I really like Kelly Olynyk over on FanDuel as a punt option. Moving on to a more appealing game. I'm kidding. Utah, Philly, not really that appealing either. At least not from a fantasy perspective, I guess. From the Utah side, Gobert, GPPs, he's fine. Does at least have the defensive skill set and the smarts to be able to battle with Joel Embiid down low, but there's better center options on the slate. So unless you're just building a bunch of lineups, Rudy Gobert is not a guy that I have a ton of interest in. It is worth noting, Philly has had issues defending some of these like stretch bigs, stretch power forwards. They rank 30th in defensive efficiency overall to the position, 26.1 points, 14.8 rebounds, 4.1 assists, and almost 50% shooting from allowed to the position. It's going to make Derek Favors someone that I have a decent amount of interest in. Coming off a little bit of a down game against the Mavericks, but like just pulling up his game log, minutes are always going to be, in the mid-20s for the most part, low to mid-20s, but he's just really, really, really consistent. Very rarely gets you less than 20 fantasy points. Sometimes it's going to get you more than 30, but for the most part, you feel pretty comfortable that he's going to get you in the mid-20s in fantasy points at 5,400 over on FanDuel, and he is really cheap over here on DraftKings as well, at 4,500. I prefer more on DraftKings, but I'm perfectly fine with him in cash on FanDuel as well. I think DraftKings, he makes for an appealing tournament option just because he's still priced really low. Crowder is interesting. Is spotting up on 30% of his possessions this season. Philly is allowing 1.11 points per possession on spot ups. That makes Crowder someone that I have interest in. Again, just a really solid contributor. Not going to give you huge games most nights. We're going to exclude Boston. There's some heat, a little bit of revenge in that one. He's coming off a couple down games, but just a guy is generally going to give you in the upper 20s in minutes and decent production night in and night out. So I have some interest in Jay Crowder. If you're looking for a cheap cash game option there. Ingles is fine in tournaments. Mitchell's fine in tournaments, on DraftKings at least. At 7,200, usage is going to be there. Field goal attempts are going to be there. His role has not changed that much from last season. He just hasn't been producing very well, so it's made it a little bit tough for him to put up solid games. But at 7,200, that price on DraftKings, really tough to ignore. And if you look over on FanDuel, 7,800, price is starting to come down. So even in tournaments over there, I'm fine with taking a shot. Alec Burks, an interesting value option over here on FanDuel at 3,500. Most nights he's going to get you over 20 fantasy points. He's going to have some duds from time to time, but he's fine. On the Philly side of things, Joel Embiid is really, really, really interesting to me. 10-9 on FanDuel, but he's really, really cheap over here on DraftKings at 10-3. I know that's kind of crazy, but dude's been just really, really good this season. Gonna get you 40-plus fantasy points pretty much every single night, but has monster upside. We've seen the 30-10 games out of him, but these double-double and triple-double nights, those are the nights where you really, really love having Joel Embiid in at 10-3. We know he has that potential. He was the guy in the first game was least affected by by Ben Simmons being there. He still had a monster usage rate. Let me pull that up. I posted it in my Discord last night, but I don't have it anymore. So let's pull this up. I think he had an over 30% usage rate in that game. Let's see, cleaning the glass. Shooting transition player stats. Usage, Joel Embiid, 32.9% usage rate. JJ Redick, 23% usage rate. Jimmy Butler, 17.8. Ben Simmons, 13.9. That was a little bit what I was concerned about. I did expect Ben Simmons to take a hit when it comes to his usage and what he was going to be able to do with Jimmy Butler on the floor. I didn't expect his usage rate to go down to 13%. I think some of that was just Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler just working the two-man game and trying to get used to working with each other. I still think Ben Simmons is fine in tournaments, especially where his price has come down. He's like 8,200 over on DraftKings. He is 9,100 on FanDuel. I'm fine with him in tournaments if you're just trying to get some exposure. We've seen point guards have success, especially ones that can get to the rim against the Utah Jazz. So if you wanted to take a shot, I'm fine with it. Not someone that I'd be looking at in cash games. Really, the only guy that I think is even cash game safe is Joel Embiid. I just don't know if I want to pay that price in cash for him. So Butler, Redick are fine. And tournaments as well. Not the best matchup. And then Wilson Chandler is a viable punt option, not someone that I have a lot of interest in tonight. Moving on, Brooklyn at Washington. Washington 7-point favorites. What are you doing, Vegas? Washington should not be 7-point favorites. This is a fun game. I have a lot of interest in this game. Starting with the Brooklyn side of things. I've talked about it before. I'm not a huge believer in home road splits, especially if it's something that hasn't been there for a very, very long time. But D'Angelo Russell, 44% shooting from three on the road this season, 28.1% at home. Against a Washington team that is allowing opponents to shoot 39% from three, D'Angelo Russell could be like the guy tonight. He had a 35.6% usage rate without LeVert. Took 18 shots in 24 minutes. I expect he's going to play more minutes than he played the other night. Like, I expect him to eclipse 30. D'Angelo Russell, a guy, 6,600 on DraftKings. He's a core option for me. So far I've pretty much named Kyrie Irving and D'Angelo Russell as core options on the slate for me. 7,200 on FanDuel, still a guy, monster upside. I really love D'Angelo Russell here. I like Spencer Dinwiddie as well. 6K price, a little bit elevated, but we know the minutes are going to be there for him as long as this game stays close. And guess what? Washington's terrible, so this game's going to stay close. Their defense is really bad. Dinwiddie, a guy, cash game viable for me in the spot. Because Washington, they rank 30th in defensive efficiency to point guards on the season. They're allowing 42.7% shooting from three to point guards. Russell and Dinwiddie, they're gonna score tonight. So I'm fine if you wanted to pair both of them together, because they're both gonna get a bunch of minutes. Whenever they share the floor together, Dinwiddie's going to assist Russell a decent amount. I don't really believe heavily in negative correlation with outside of specific circumstances. This is one of those circumstances where I'm fine if you wanted to use both of them. Crabbe and Harris are two interesting options. Kenny Atkinson has talked about how Alan Crabbe has just been out of sorts, as far as out of sync. He hasn't found his rhythm. He's been working really, really hard to find his rhythm against a Washington team that really struggles against three-point shooters. Guys like Alan Crabbe could be in line for really, really big games. Crabbe got the start last game. 3,700 on DraftKings. He only shot 6 times, but 2 of 4 from three. He's fine in tournaments. I think I'm going to lean Joe Harris in this spot, though. Joe Harris at 4,400 over on DraftKings. He is small forward eligible, which is not a fantastic position tonight, and 4,600 over on FanDuel. He's a guy who's going to shoot a lot, and I have a lot of interest in him. He has upside. It is interesting to note 34% of his possessions come in something. My notes are incomplete. I did not put where his possessions, 34% of his possessions, come from. Spot up shooters. He's spotting up on 34% of his possessions, 5.6 points per game, ranks in the 90th percentile of spot up shooters. Washington, 1.09 points per possession allowed to spot up shooters. I mentioned 3-point shooting. 53% of all of his shots are from three. Joe Harris, very, very interesting option. I think he might be cash game viable depending on how things shake out, but right now I'm reserving him mostly for tournaments. I'm fine with Jared Allen in the spot. Should be good to go. The article I read, Kenny Atkinson, his quote was, "We could be without RHJ tonight, so we might have to change our rotations around." He didn't really say anything about Jared Allen. Allen did make the trip. He should be good to go in the spot. Washington still allowing almost 50 rebounds per game and 64% shooting at the rim, along with 16.3 second chance points per game. Jared Allen, just a very, very cheap option, mostly tournaments though. Looking at the Washington side of things, Scott Brooks did come out and say he wants to cut back on the minutes for Wall and Beal. I'm not overly concerned about that because he was playing those guys like 40 minutes a night. So for Scott Brooks to cut them back, it's going to be like 33, 34 instead of like 38, 40, 41. In a matchup with Brooklyn, I'm still okay with both of these guys in cash and tournaments. John Wall, 9,500 on DraftKings and 10-2 on FanDuel. More of a tournament option for me at that price tag. I think there's a couple point guard options, one that I've already talked about that I like a little bit more, but I don't think people are going to pay that price for Wall, so that makes him definitely interesting in tournaments. Bradley Beal, the guy I have a little bit more interest in, 8,800. That's a pretty solid price for him over on DraftKings, but he is 8,100 on DraftKings, so I have a lot of interest in him here. Both these guys operating in the pick and roll over 20% of the time. Brooklyn allowing 1.06 points per possession in the pick and roll. Both of them shoot in the mid-range about 28% of the time. Brooklyn allowing opponents to shoot 48% in the mid-range. I prefer, again, Bradley Beal for the discount, but both perfectly fine options if you so choose. 35% of Porter's shots come in the mid-range. Opponents, again, shooting 48.1% against Brooklyn in the mid-range. So Otto Porter, a fine tournament option. If he gets hot, he's going to continue to put up a solid game, and he's just a little bit too cheap for the upside he has in this spot. I still think Markieff Morris is one of the best cash game and tournament options in his price range. And then on DraftKings, Dwight Howard, I'm going to continue to go back to the well with Dwight Howard. It has not paid off yet. I eventually am going to give up on this Dwight Howard thing. But for now, for a guy that should play about 30 minutes, has monster upside in the spot at 5,700. Brooklyn is a team we've been able to take centers against for like it feels like a decade. They're one of the worst teams. They're giving up 65 fantasy points per game to centers. They rank like 29th in defensive efficiency. He hasn't had a monster Dwight Howard game. It's going to come at some point. It's possibly going to happen tonight at 5,700 on DraftKings. I don't know how you don't just lock him in and move on. 7K on FanDuel, I could understand fading. But on DraftKings, yeah, I'm not fading that. So that does it for that. If you wanted to get some Jeff Green value on like FanDuel, I'm fine with that. He's been pretty consistently getting you 20 plus fantasy points, so and he's still pretty cheap. Moving on, Sacramento at Memphis. Memphis 6-point favorites in this one. Let's scroll this over. Memphis, not really a team I like to target too much. I will say De'Aaron Fox is a little bit underpriced over on DraftKings at 6,800. Had a really good game against Memphis last time out, um, averaging 19.5 points and 7.2 assists for their 7th win in the past 10 games. So, um, pretty solid numbers from Fox. So I'm fine with him over on DraftKings. Not going to touch him on FanDuel. He's like 8K. Yeah, that's a hard pass for me there. The return of Bogdan Bogdanovic has kind of hurt Bielitsa a little bit. It's hurt Marvin Bagley a little bit. But both guys, interesting tournament options. Bogdanovic, if he's going to play 25, 28, even close to 30 minutes, he is a guy that can shoot a lot. I'm fine with him in tournaments as well. What is he over here on FanDuel? Where is he? Shooting guard, 4,400. Yeah, that's fine in tournaments. I'm completely fine with that. But the rest of this team, just not really that appealing. Yeah, I'm just not going to go there. Grizzlies, paced up spot for them. They're very short-handed still. Omri Caspi is probable, but Dylan Brooks, JaMychal Green, and Chandler Parsons are all out. That, of course, opens up minutes across the board, and that kind of secures the minutes for Mike Conley. Mike Conley, someone that I do have a lot of interest in here. 8,300 over on FanDuel, perfectly fine in cash, perfectly fine in tournaments. 7K on DraftKings, way too cheap for just minutes floor out of this guy. I mean, 36, 36, 42, 36, 31, 27. Those two games a little bit down, but 33, 35. Like, we're getting a lot of minutes out of Mike Conley. And it's really tough to fade the minutes floor that he has, especially in cash games. This is a good matchup for him here. Kings do really struggle on the glass. They're giving up 50 rebounds per game to opponents. That boosts Gasol's floor. I'm fine with him in cash and tournaments. 7,400, that's a really fair price for him. So I like him a lot here. Double-doubled the last time these teams faced off. Outside of him, Kyle Anderson's price is coming down. So, yeah, I'm fine with Kyle Anderson. It really sucks to ever say Kyle Anderson's a good play, but at 4,800 on DraftKings, he's fine, especially if he's going to be playing this many minutes. He's a little bit better priced, I think, over here on FanDuel at 5,900. Jesus, what are you doing, FanDuel? Killing me. Cash on FanDuel, cash tournaments on DraftKings, but it's also Kyle Anderson, so do with that what you will. Shelvin Mack continues to be overlooked on a nightly basis, continues to be really cheap, continues to play like 30 minutes, plays alongside Mike Conley, gets you some assists. It's a great spot for Shelvin Mack. 4,200 cash games for sure, tournaments for sure. I think he's nearing fade territory here. 4,800, I guess if you need a value point guard that you want to get 30 minutes out of, that's fine. Everyone else, Temple, is fine. Fine in cash. It is a revenge game, but he wasn't feeling very vengeful last time these teams played. But still a guy you're getting about 30 minutes a night, 30 plus minutes a night out of. So at 4K, I'll take that, especially in a very positive matchup. And then Jaren Jackson Jr., really cheap. Good matchup. 5,400. Again, foul trouble. We talked about it against Milwaukee. Obviously, whenever you have Giannis driving to the basket 455 times per game, it makes it really hard for guys like Jaren Jackson to keep their hands to themselves. But you don't have that as much in this matchup with Sacramento, and we know he has monster upside. This is a really good spot for Jaren Jackson Jr. I almost feel comfortable with him in cash, but right now he's going to be just a tournament option. Even at 6,900, I think he has upside. Really solid game against this team last time out. Still fouled out, but 14-7 in 30 minutes. So good spot for Jaren Jackson Jr. Tonight. Moving on, Portland, Minnesota. I think that's the next game in my notes. Yes, Portland, 1.5 point favorites, 223 over under. Seth Curry is out, Mo Harkless is out, and Derrick Rose is questionable. Looking at the Portland side of this thing, I love, 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 love Damian Lillard here. Um, Played 38 minutes against the Lakers, even though he was nursing that knee injury. He has 23 assists over the past 2 games and has notched back-to-back doubles. He's scored 25 or more points on 9 occasions this season. He's shooting a ton. He's taken at least 7 3-pointers in all but 2 of the last 10 games. Opponents are shooting 38% from 3 against Minnesota. On FanDuel, like my 2 point guards are going to be Lillard and Kyrie. Like, I'm just going to be building around those guys. I would like to find a way to get Lillard and Kyrie in the spot on DraftKings. It's going to be a little tough because some of the other guys that I like, but I really, really want to. Yeah, it's a good spot for him. CJ McCollum's fine in tournaments. Again, we've talked about it countless freaking times. He's basically playing alongside Damian Lillard pretty much every single minute of every single game. They might change things up a little bit tonight with Seth Curry being out and stagger McCollum and Lillard a little bit more. So I think that definitely makes McCollum tournament viable here at 6,500 on DraftKings. And what is he? 6,700. I mean, that's still fine. I'm okay with it. He's still shooting a lot. And that's positive to see, but it's the assist numbers and things like that where he's not really getting those. So he's relying heavily on his scoring. So that just makes him tournament viable for me. But against a Minnesota team that's really bad against 3-pointers, I have a lot of interest in McCollum in tournaments. Turner continues to be a really solid cash game option off the bench. Does have upside, I think, in the spot with Curry out. He could get a little more usage, could notch a couple more assists, get a couple more shots. I'm fine with him in cash, but also fine with him in tournaments. Nurkic, it is a monster spot for Nurkic against Karl Anthony Towns. Dude's averaging like 19.5 points and 15.5 rebounds over the past couple of games. Monster double upside. 7,100 is still too cheap. He put up like almost 40 fantasy points in 22 minutes against this team last time out. It was a monster blowout if I remember correctly. 111-81, played 23 minutes, still 19 and 12. If he would have gotten like 3 or 4 more minutes, which he definitely could have against Towns, he would have had a huge game. Nurkic going to be someone that I'm going to be trying to force in my lineups. He's fine on FanDuel too. He's like 8K. I feel pretty comfortable that he's going to pay that salary off tonight. Looking at the rest, Aminu's fine. I'm just never there's a lot of games where I'm not terribly excited about Aminu. This is one of them, but 12% of his shots are corner threes. Minnesota's allowing opponents to shoot 44% on corner threes. He's fine in all formats if you just need a guy to fit your lineups. So not terribly intrigued by him unless he just kind of makes your lineup work. Nick Stauskas, always fine in tournaments, always really reliant on his scoring. If he's shooting really well, he's going to play, you're going to see him get these 20, 23, 24 minutes. If he's not, he's going to get like 13 minutes. So still a fine tournament like punt option tonight. Minnesota side, without Butler on the floor this season, Cat, 29% usage rate, 1.55 fantasy points per minute. It's a great matchup. He's still a little bit underpriced. I think 10-6, that's about where I expect him to settle for the majority of the season on FanDuel. But over on DraftKings at 9,600, he's going to get you 40-plus fantasy points just about every single night now that Butler is out of town. Portland does struggle against post-ups. They're allowing 0.98 points per possession on post-ups. He's posting up about 20% of his possessions. I like him in all formats. Plenty of upside here. Going to be a spot where I have some interest in Towns if I can afford to get him in my lineups. Portland really struggles in its spot-up shooters, allowing 1.09 points per possessions to them, which makes Robert Covington very interesting, spotting up 23% of his possessions this season. We saw him play like 40 minutes last game. It's a decent matchup for him. He's going to play like 40 minutes. I have no issues with Covington in cash or tournaments. Over on DraftKings, over on FanDuel at 65, more of just cash game. I don't think he has a ton of upside at that price. Teague still a little bit too cheap if you need a guy in that price range, 6,900. That's kind of fair for him, but he is 5,900 over on DraftKings. I'm fine with that. Let me pull up his usage without Butler this season. It is, I don't have it handy. So without Rose this season, Teague has, that's got to be old. %28 usage rate, 1.38 fantasy points per minute. That's without Butler and Rose, but let's take Rose out of that equation because Rose is not ruled out yet. And Teague, 1.14 fantasy points per minute, 24.7% usage rate. I'm fine with that in all formats. And Derrick Rose, 32% usage rate, 1.23 fantasy points per minute without Towns, or without Butler. So even Rose at 7K, if he's able to go, is going to play a decent amount of minutes. I'm fine with him too, especially in tournaments. And then Andrew Wiggins, perfectly fine in all formats as well. Moving on to the next game, which is the Knicks at Pelicans. New Orleans favored by 10 in this one, 227 over under. I would absolutely love to get a ton of exposure to this game. Unfortunately, you can only feel comfortable in one side of this game because David Fizdale is being a moron with his rotations. He started Kevin Knox and Moutier last game. Everybody, it was a little bit of a blowout, but everybody played like 20 plus minutes in that game. Literally everybody. Knox played almost 30 minutes. That makes him appealing in the spot. He's still cheap. He would be about the only guy that I have interest in here. 4,300 on DraftKings. He is 4,900 over on FanDuel. He's about the only guy I feel comfortable in at this point. Took 16 shots last game. Pelicans struggle in transition and against spot-up shooters, so that gives them a boost. Noah Vonleh's fine in cash and tournaments on FanDuel. At his price, he's like 4,400. 46 on DraftKings. I would probably prefer like Derek Favors or someone like that. And then if you think Mitchell Robinson gets in foul trouble, which he could, or if he sits this game out, Enes Kanter going to play a lot of minutes. He has upside at his current price tag. Mitchell Robinson, I guess, is fine in tournaments. I'm okay with that. But the rest, like this rotation is just really crappy. Moutier in tournaments, I guess, is okay. At 4K on FanDuel, where you know his salary, his score is going to get dropped if he doesn't have a good game. But the rest of these guys, like I just don't want to deal with them getting 21, 22 minutes and hopefully getting 20 plus fantasy points. It's just not worth it. There's too many good places to go. So you're looking at Knox. I guess Tim Hardaway Jr. in tournaments, 6,700 is fine. Yeah, Knox, Vonleh on FanDuel is fine, and then Kanter in tournaments. What's his FanDuel price? 6K. Kanter at 6K in tournaments is very, very appealing over on FanDuel. So that's kind of how I would attack that. On the other side of this, all right, we're going to ignore my watch for now. On the other side of this, Knicks, absolute shit show on defense. They're allowing like 111 points per game to opponents. Jrue Holiday, 8,800 on FanDuel and 8,300 on DraftKings. Even with Alfred potentially coming back in the spot, he's a guy I just feel comfortable getting 40 fantasy points every single night. So in cash, I like him a whole heck of a lot. Does have tournament upside. Knicks are allowing 1.2 or 1.12 points per possession in isolation. 12% of his possessions come in isolation. 45.6. Knicks are allowing 45.6% shooting in the paint. 20% of his shots come from there. I like him a lot. He's fine in tournaments too, but like I feel just more comfortable with him in cash because I can feel like I'm locking in 40 plus fantasy points. 3-Twan Moore has been on fire the past couple of games. He's fine if you want to chase that in tournaments. I can't recommend him in cash. Scored 17 points on 7 of 10 in shooting in a win over Phoenix. 30 points on 13 of 18 from the floor against Toronto, and then had a really good game against Minnesota as well. Again, lots and lots of potential for him if he's scoring really well to have a good game at 5,200. I do really like that in tournaments. Again, not a cash game guy. I don't want to chase the floor with Etuan Moore. Anthony Davis. It's Anthony Davis. I don't really need to say anything. If you want to pay up, Anthony Davis at 11.4 and 12.8. It's Anthony Davis. Y'all don't pay for me to tell you that Anthony Davis is a good play. I do really like Mirotic in cash in tournaments. Hopefully the ankle's fine. He wasn't on yesterday's injury report, but Pelicans haven't been great this season dealing with some of these injuries. So 7,800 and 7,400 is kind of where I like him a little bit more over on DraftKings. And then Julius Randle, if Mirotic misses, is fine in all formats. Elfrid Payton probably going to be limited minutes if he comes back tonight, but at 5,600, I think it's worth the shot in tournaments with Elfrid Payton. Moving on, we have the last game of the night. Chicago-Milwaukee. Milwaukee 13.5 point favorites, 223.5 over under. Looking at this game on the Chicago side, Zach LaVine, almost 33% usage rate on the season. 7,800, really cheap for a guy that's, again, you feel pretty comfortable that he's going to get you about 40 fantasy points most nights. Obviously struggled against Boston. But Dallas, Cleveland, this guy's going to get you 40 plus most nights. So very high usage guy. As long as this game stays close, he's going to get the minutes. I'm fine with him in all formats. But given how the slate breaks down on some of the other guys at the position, he's probably better suited for tournaments because you're going to get safer options in cash. It is a Jabari Parker revenge game. Milwaukee has really struggled to defend in the mid-range, where 37% of his shots come from. I've talked about it time and time again. Usage rate does come down a little bit being in the starting lineup with Zach LaVine, but he still has upside. 13, 17, 13, 14 field goal attempts, 15. Going to be taking a lot of shots. If he can notch a couple extra boards against a Milwaukee team that has struggled at times on the glass, I'm fine with him in all formats. 5,700, that's a really good price for Jabari Parker. 64, more of a tournament price, I think, on FanDuel. Wendell Carter Jr. over on DraftKings is very, very cheap, very underpriced at 5,300. He's a guy. He has upside. Again, the minutes, I know some of these are blowouts, but he should be getting run in blowouts because he's a freaking rookie and he needs playing time. But even in close games, when he's not in foul trouble, he's still not getting the minutes recently. I don't know what Fred Hoiberg is doing with him, but 5,300 makes him a great, great, great tournament option in this spot. I assume he's still 8K over on FanDuel. Oh, wow. They lowered his price, 6,600. I am okay with that in tournaments. I wish he was center eligible, though. Yeah, that pretty much does it. I'm not going with the Arcidiacono. I guess Justin Holiday is cheap enough to consider on DraftKings in tournaments. I'm going to play a lot of minutes if this game stays close. That's all I got. It's so hard to say positive things about the Bulls. It's so hard. Looking at Milwaukee, again, you guys don't pay for me to tell you that Giannis is a good option. 11.5 on DraftKings. That's a good price for him. 11.5 on FanDuel. I prefer him over Davis on FanDuel. One, because I don't like the small forward position that much tonight, and two, you get a little bit of a discount. Chicago does really struggle in transition, which is a pretty big boost for Giannis. They're giving up 1.22 points per possession and transition on the season. Giannis, 21.6% of his possessions come in transition. It's a boost for Eric Bledsoe, where almost 30% of his possessions are in transition. It's a boost for Malcolm Brogdon. 23% of his possessions come in transition. 90th percentile for Brogdon. It's a boost for pretty much everyone on this team. Literally everyone on this team is in play. Like there's outside of like Tony Snell and Thon McCurr, you could talk me into most of these guys. I really like Brogdon at his price. Outside of his last game, he's 5,400 on FanDuel, and he is 5K on DraftKings. That's way too cheap. Outside of his last game, where he went 4-11 from the floor, 14 fantasy points, had scored over 20 real points in 3 straight. He's just a guy. He can score. He can get you some steals. He can get you, the rebounds and the assists. I just really like his all-around game, and at 5K, he's just really, really cheap. He's a great value. Bledsoe, Chris Middleton, both a little bit underpriced, I think, especially on DraftKings. Both these guys, Bledsoe at 6,800, Chris Middleton at 6,900. Even a 7,500, really, really good price for Middleton. 7,100 on Bledsoe. That's about where I expect him to be. But Chris Middleton, coming off a couple of down games, but he's just a guy who scores, really, really good scorer. Chicago ranks 21st in defensive efficiency, is allowing shooting guard or small forwards or shooting guards. Which one is it? My notes again, not complete. Small forwards. They're allowing small forwards to shoot 41% from 3. Chris Middleton does play that small forward position the majority of the time. I really, really love Chris Middleton in all formats. Brolo in GPPs, again, a guy can shoot a decent amount, so he's fine in GPPs. The guy to keep an eye on is Pat Connaughton. Coming off a stretch of games where he's been really, really, really good. 4,300 on FanDuel. He is 3,600 on DraftKings. He's going to be popular, and for good reason. He's coming off a monster game against Memphis. Played 27 minutes, but if you look outside of this Denver game, 20 minutes in 3 of the last 4. A lot of these games he's playing right around that 20-minute mark, but he's getting you like right around 20 fantasy points. With Dante DiVincenzo out, you're going to see probably 25 to 28 minutes of Pat Connaughton. 3,600 against the Bulls. I will take that. Should get run in a blowout too. So, yeah, Pat Connaughton, I think one of the best value plays on the slate, pretty much all around the industry, even on FanDuel at his slightly elevated price tag. But that does it. That's the entire slate. Pretty good slate, I think. Lots of really good options. So just keep an eye on the news. There are a couple guys that we do have to keep an eye on, especially like Derrick Rose. But good luck in all your contests tonight, and I will be back tomorrow.